How did one unassuming professor and devout Christian rise to become a Confederate legend? How did he, a man known for his fierce beliefs and complex nature, come to be celebrated and feared in equal measure? This is the story of Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee's right-hand man, whose name continues to resonate through the annals of American history. Jackson's role in the American Civil War remains a topic of both admiration and controversy. Known for his military brilliance and relentless dedication, he became one of the most important Confederate generals. His leadership, marked by both remarkable success and deeply held personal beliefs, helped shape the Confederate Army's strategy during the war. His tactics, his faith, and his indomitable will made him a figure who is still studied and respected by military strategists, despite the complex and often contentious nature of the war itself. This documentary will trace Jackson's journey from a humble childhood to the battlefields of the Civil War. It will examine how a man who once taught at a small Virginia military academy rose to prominence on the national stage, earning a reputation as one of the most successful generals of the Confederacy. His relationship with Robert E. Lee, his role in crucial battles, and his unique ability to inspire his troops all form key elements of his legacy. But the story of Stonewall Jackson is not just about military tactics. It's also about the faith that guided him, the convictions that defined him, and the personal sacrifices he made in service of a cause that ultimately failed. The narrative will also explore the defining moments of Jackson's career, such as his pivotal victories in battles like Bull Run and Chancellorsville, which solidified his reputation as a fierce and brilliant leader. These victories, coupled with his reputation for being both a brilliant strategist and a man of great moral conviction, made him an icon of the Confederacy. Yet, his untimely death during the war and the subsequent loss of his leadership left a vacuum that the Confederacy could never fully fill. Was Stonewall Jackson a brilliant strategist whose genius went unmatched, or was he simply a product of his time, driven by a cause that, in retrospect, feels both tragic and contentious? His life is a testament to the complexities of war and the human spirit. This documentary will take you through the milestones of his life, examining both his military successes and his personal struggles, to reveal the true legacy of a man who, in many ways, defined the Confederate cause. To understand Stonewall Jackson is to look beyond the battles and into the man himself, a leader defined not just by his victories, but by the fierce convictions that made him who he was. Early life and background. Stonewall Jackson was born on January 21, 1824, in a small town called Clarksburg, which is now part of West Virginia. He came into a world full of challenges, and from the very beginning, his life was marked by loss and struggle. Jackson's father, Jonathan Jackson, was a lawyer, but his health was fragile, and he passed away when Stonewall was only 2 years old. His mother, Julia Jackson, was left to raise him and his siblings on her own. She faced many difficulties as a single parent during that time. Jackson grew up in a household where money was often tight. His mother had to manage the family on her own while dealing with the grief of losing her husband. Because of their financial struggles, Jackson and his family moved often, making it hard for him to build lasting friendships or feel settled in one place. Despite these challenges, his mother was determined to provide a good education for him. She made sure he went to school, even if it meant making sacrifices. However, Jackson's education was often interrupted because the family was constantly moving. One of the most significant events of Jackson's early years was his relationship with his mother. She was a strong religious woman who taught him the values of hard work, dedication, and faith. These lessons stayed with him throughout his life. Jackson was known for his strict discipline and sense of duty, qualities that were likely influenced by his upbringing and the difficult circumstances of his early life. Jackson's childhood was also shaped by the loss of his mother. In 1831, when Jackson was just 7 years old, his mother passed away from illness. This was another major blow in his young life, and it had a lasting effect on him. Jackson was sent to live with an uncle, who took care of him after his mother's death. This uncle, who lived in the nearby town of Cadiz, Ohio, played a key role in shaping Jackson's character during these formative years. The loss of both his father and mother created a sense of instability in Jackson's life. He struggled with feelings of abandonment and loneliness, which later made him a more determined and focused individual. During this time, he developed a fierce work ethic and a sense of self-reliance, which became core parts of his personality. After his mother's death, Jackson attended various schools, though he struggled in his studies at first. He wasn't the best student in his early years, and his teachers found him quiet and reserved. Jackson's classmates didn't always understand him, and he was often described as awkward and shy. Yet, he had a strong desire to prove himself. He worked hard to overcome his academic difficulties and began to excel in certain subjects, particularly mathematics. At the age of 18, Jackson's life took a major turn when he entered the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1842. It was a challenging time for him, as he faced a lot of pressure and competition. West Point was known for its tough standards, and Jackson was not the best cadet when he first arrived. In fact, he struggled with the military training and had difficulty fitting in with his peers. However, Jackson's persistence paid off. He stayed focused, and over time, he became known for his disciplined approach to training. Though he wasn't the most popular cadet, he gained respect for his hard work and dedication. Jackson graduated from West Point in 1846, ranked 17th out of 59 cadets. Although he didn't stand out for his social skills, his determination and discipline earned him a solid reputation. This period of his life laid the foundation for his later success as a military leader. After graduation, Jackson was assigned to the 1st U.S. Artillery, and he served in the Mexican-American War, where he gained valuable military experience. It was during this time that he first earned recognition for his bravery and tactical skills, though his rise to prominence would come much later during the Civil War. The early years of Stonewall Jackson's life were filled with hardship and loss, but they shaped him into the determined and resilient figure he would later become. His experiences with loss, his mother's strong influence, and his time at West Point taught him valuable lessons in discipline, perseverance and loyalty, which would guide him throughout his career. Despite facing many challenges, Jackson's early years showed his ability to overcome adversity, and this resilience would become one of his defining characteristics. Stonewall Jackson's rise to prominence was a story of discipline, tactical genius, and unyielding commitment to his cause. His early life, military background, and leadership during key battles played a pivotal role in shaping his legacy as one of the most respected generals of the Civil War. His path to fame was neither easy nor quick, but his determination and ability to adapt to the changing realities of war set him apart from many of his peers. Before the Civil War, Jackson's military career began with his service in the Mexican-American War, where he learned valuable lessons in leadership and combat. Although he did not become widely known during this conflict, his experiences in battle helped to form the foundation of his future military success. Jackson fought in several important battles, including the Battle of Veracruz and the Battle of Chapultepec, where he exhibited bravery and a calm demeanor under pressure. His performance earned him a promotion, yet he remained relatively unknown to the broader public at that time. However, it was clear that Jackson's calm under fire and his ability to lead soldiers would become crucial to his later achievements. After the Mexican-American War, Jackson returned to civilian life and became a professor at the Virginia Military Institute, VMI. At VMI, he gained a reputation for his strict and demanding teaching style, which shaped the lives of his students and future officers in the Confederate Army. Jackson was known for his uncompromising standards, and while his methods were challenging, they proved effective in preparing young men for the hardships of war. His time at VMI was not just about teaching military tactics. It was a period where Jackson honed the characteristics that would define his leadership during the Civil War: discipline, clarity, and focus. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 marked a turning point in Jackson's life. Despite his strong ties to Virginia, Jackson's decision to join the Confederate Army was motivated by his belief in the Southern cause. Initially, his rank and role were modest, but his unwavering commitment to the Confederacy soon set him apart. Jackson's rise to prominence began with his performance during the First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the First Battle of Manassas. In this battle, Jackson's brigade earned the famous nickname Stonewall when he held his position against overwhelming Union forces. His steadfastness in the face of pressure won him the respect of his peers and cemented his reputation as a reliable and courageous leader. Following Bull Run, Jackson's career took a decisive turn during the 1862 Shenandoah Valley Campaign. With fewer resources and a smaller force, Jackson used his tactical brilliance to outmaneuver his opponents. His ability to create confusion and deceive Union commanders by making his forces appear larger than they were earned him several victories. This campaign solidified his reputation as a master of mobile warfare. His actions in the valley forced Union forces to divert attention and resources away from other critical battlefronts, a strategic success that added to his growing fame. Jackson's role in the Confederate Army grew significantly after the Shenandoah Valley victories. He became one of General Robert E. Lee's most trusted commanders. Lee's overall strategy for the Confederacy benefited greatly from Jackson's ability to execute complex missions with speed and precision. The two generals worked in close coordination, and Jackson's quick decision-making and bold actions often provided the Confederate Army with the upper hand at critical moments. Jackson's leadership style was marked by his strict discipline, unwavering confidence, and his calmness under pressure. He inspired his troops by leading from the front, sharing the hardships of battle with them. This earned him the loyalty and respect of his soldiers, who trusted him deeply. His ability to maintain control during the chaos of battle was one of his defining qualities, and it was one of the reasons his troops were willing to follow him into the most dangerous of situations. Despite his many successes, Jackson's methods sometimes caused friction with other Confederate leaders. His strict approach to discipline and his preference for independent action created tension with some of his peers. However, his consistent victories on the battlefield and his ability to achieve tactical objectives made these disagreements secondary to his overall effectiveness as a commander. The turning point of Jackson's military career was his involvement in the campaigns that helped shape the Confederate Army's overall strategy. His victories at Bull Run, the Shenandoah Valley, and his subsequent campaigns demonstrated his tactical brilliance. His ability to outthink and outmaneuver larger Union forces set him apart from many other commanders. Jackson's methods were unorthodox but incredibly effective. His leadership and successes made him one of the most celebrated and respected generals in the Confederate Army. By 1863, Jackson's reputation was firmly established, and he was considered one of the finest generals the Confederacy had. His rise to prominence was not just the result of his victories but also his ability to inspire his troops, maintain discipline, and think strategically in the heat of battle. His leadership in key campaigns earned him respect from both Confederate soldiers and Union commanders alike. Jackson's legacy as a military leader is one of ingenuity, courage, and an unwavering commitment to his cause. Even in death, his impact on the Confederate Army and his place in history remains secure. Stonewall Jackson's involvement in the American Civil War was marked by a series of key battles and conflicts, each of which contributed to his rise as one of the most respected and capable commanders in the Confederate Army. His tactical genius, courage, and ability to inspire his men were clearly demonstrated during several pivotal moments in the war. From his early battles to his ultimate sacrifice at Chancellorsville, each event played a significant role in shaping the course of the war. One of Jackson's earliest significant moments came during the First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the Battle of Manassas, which took place in July 1861. At this point, the Confederate Army was still trying to establish its strength and organization. The Union Army, led by General Irvin McDowell, was confident they could defeat the Confederates and end the rebellion quickly. However, the Union troops underestimated the resolve of the Southern soldiers, and Jackson's role became crucial. During the battle, Jackson's unit stood firm against overwhelming Union forces. His troops held their ground on Henry House Hill, despite heavy artillery and infantry fire. This determined stance led to General Bernard Bee's famous declaration, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall," which gave Jackson his now iconic nickname. The Confederates emerged victorious in this battle, and it was the first major military victory for the South, giving them a significant morale boost. After his success at Bull Run, Jackson's reputation as a fearless leader began to grow. His next major test came with the Shenandoah Valley campaign in 1862. The Shenandoah Valley was a strategically important area for both the Union and the Confederacy. Union forces were intent on securing the valley to disrupt Confederate supply lines and weaken the South. However, Jackson's smaller army proved to be more than a match for the much larger Union forces. Throughout the campaign, Jackson's use of rapid movement, surprise attacks, and effective defensive tactics allowed him to win a series of significant victories. One of the key moments came at the Battle of McDowell, where Jackson's forces defeated a Union force under General Robert H. Milroy. Although outnumbered, Jackson used the terrain to his advantage, employing a combination of feigned retreats and surprise flanking maneuvers to confuse and overpower the Union soldiers. Jackson's most significant victory during the Shenandoah Valley Campaign came at the Battle of Port Republic in June 1862. In this battle, Jackson defeated Union forces under General James Shields, forcing them to retreat. This victory, along with others in the campaign, prevented Union forces from advancing further into the valley and secured critical supply routes for the Confederacy. More importantly, the success in the Shenandoah Valley gained Jackson widespread recognition for his unconventional warfare tactics, which would define his future actions. Following the Shenandoah Valley Campaign, Jackson's talents were further recognized by General Robert E. Lee, the overall commander of the Confederate Army. Lee would incorporate Jackson into key future campaigns, such as the 7 Days Battles in the summer of 1862. The 7 Days Battles were a series of battles fought near Richmond, Virginia, where Union General George McClellan had laid siege to the Confederate capital. Lee needed reinforcements to strengthen his forces, and Jackson played a critical role in delaying the Union Army. He was not directly involved in the fighting at every battle of the 7 days, but his maneuvers helped slow McClellan's advance, allowing Lee to bolster his defenses. Jackson's role in these battles demonstrated his importance as a strategic asset in the Confederate Army. In August 1862, Jackson played a pivotal role in the Second Battle of Bull Run, also known as the Battle of Manassas. By now, Jackson had earned the confidence of General Lee and was entrusted with a key part of the Southern Army's efforts. The Union Army, now commanded by General John Pope, was determined to avenge its loss in the First Bull Run and take control of Northern Virginia. However, Jackson and Lee's forces struck swiftly and decisively. Jackson's tactics at Bull Run involved splitting his forces into smaller groups, then quickly reuniting them to strike the Union Army from unexpected angles. This created confusion among the Union ranks and led to another Confederate victory. Jackson's ability to surprise the enemy and attack from unexpected directions demonstrated his exceptional tactical mind. By the time of the Battle of Fredericksburg in December 1862, Jackson had solidified his status as a key figure in the Confederate Army. General Lee's forces had successfully repelled Union General Ambrose Burnside's attempt to capture the city of Fredericksburg, Virginia. Jackson's forces played a critical defensive role, holding strong positions on the heights above the city. The Union troops, despite their numerical advantage, were unable to break the Confederate lines, and Burnside was forced to retreat. Although Jackson did not personally lead the main assault during Fredericksburg, his contribution to the defense was a crucial element of the victory. The most famous and tragic chapter of Jackson's career occurred during the Battle of Chancellorsville in May 1863. General Lee faced off against Union General Joseph Hooker, who had a significantly larger army and was determined to crush the Confederates. Jackson, as usual, was given an important role in the battle. He carried out an audacious flanking maneuver that took the Union Army by surprise. His forces moved swiftly through the dense woods and attacked the Union right flank, forcing them to retreat in disarray. This victory was one of the most significant Confederate successes of the war and solidified Jackson's legacy as one of the greatest tacticians in military history. However, tragedy struck on the night of May 2, 1863. As Jackson and his men returned to camp after the successful attack, they were mistaken for Union soldiers and fired upon by their own troops. Jackson was severely wounded by friendly fire, and his left arm had to be amputated. In the days that followed, Jackson's condition worsened, and he died from pneumonia on May 10, 1863. His death was a devastating blow to the Confederate Army, as he was not only a brilliant strategist but also an iconic figure for Southern morale. Jackson's role in the Civil War cannot be overstated. From his initial success at Bull Run to his final moments at Chancellorsville, he demonstrated remarkable skill in leading his troops and executing complex military strategies. His ability to outmaneuver larger Union forces and secure crucial victories for the Confederacy made him one of the most admired generals of the war. His tragic death, while marking the end of his military career, only added to the legend that would continue to inspire future generations of soldiers. Stonewall Jackson's contributions to the Confederate cause were immense, and his legacy remains a central part of Civil War history. Stonewall Jackson's life reached its peak during the Battle of Chancellorsville, which became the turning point in his career. At the time, Jackson had already gained immense recognition as one of the most capable and skilled commanders in the Confederate Army. However, it was at Chancellorsville that his brilliance would shine brightest, and tragically, it would also mark the moment of his untimely death. The Battle of Chancellorsville, fought between May 1 and May 4, 1863, was one of the most significant battles of the Civil War. General Robert E. Lee commanded the Confederate forces, while the Union Army was led by General Joseph Hooker. Hooker had a significant numerical advantage over Lee, and many believed the Union Army had a strong chance of winning. The battle was fought in Virginia, and the dense woods and difficult terrain made it a challenging environment for both sides. In the face of these obstacles, Lee took a bold and risky approach. Knowing that his forces were outnumbered, he decided to divide his army, sending Jackson with a smaller force to attack the Union's right flank. This was a risky move because if the attack failed, Lee would be left vulnerable, with a smaller army facing the full strength of the Union forces. However, Jackson was a commander known for his boldness and ability to take risks. He was trusted by General Lee to execute this plan, and he did so with unmatched skill. Jackson's forces began moving through the dense woods under cover of darkness. His troops made their way around the Union Army's flank, catching them by surprise. When they attacked the Union right, they struck hard and fast. The Union forces were not prepared for such a swift and unexpected strike. Jackson's troops hit the Union Army with such force that they were quickly pushed back. This was a decisive moment in the battle, and it gave the Confederacy a significant advantage. However, as the Confederate forces pushed forward, a tragic event occurred that would change the course of the battle, and ultimately the war. On the night of May 2, 1863, after a successful assault, Jackson and his staff were riding back to their camp. In the confusion of the night, his own men mistook him and his staff for Union soldiers and opened fire on them. Jackson was struck by several bullets, with one hitting his left arm, which was severely damaged. His arm had to be amputated, and it was clear that he was gravely wounded. Despite the severity of his injuries, Jackson remained calm and resolute. He was carried back to the Confederate camp, where doctors worked to treat his wounds. However, over the next few days, Jackson's condition worsened. He developed pneumonia, a common and deadly complication for soldiers in the field. By May 10, just 8 days after his injury, Stonewall Jackson passed away. The loss was a devastating blow to the Confederate Army. The news of Jackson's death spread quickly, and it sent shockwaves through the South. He was one of the most respected and admired commanders in the Confederate Army, and his leadership had been crucial in several key victories. Jackson's death marked the loss of a strategic genius and a symbol of the Confederate cause. His men, who had fought beside him in numerous battles, were heartbroken. Many felt as if they had lost their guiding star. Despite the setback caused by Jackson's death, General Lee continued to lead the Confederate Army with determination. However, the loss of Jackson was a blow from which the Confederacy never fully recovered. Jackson had been a master of unconventional tactics, and his ability to execute complex strategies with limited resources had been key to many of the South's victories. Without him, the Confederate Army lacked one of its most capable commanders. Jackson's legacy, however, lived on. His tactical brilliance and fearless leadership in battle became legendary. The way he had managed to outmaneuver larger Union forces and win against the odds left a lasting impression on both his fellow soldiers and military historians. He was remembered as a hero of the Confederacy and a model of courage, resilience, and skill. His death also left a deep emotional impact on the Southern people. Jackson had been a figure of hope and inspiration, and his loss was mourned by many across the South. Monuments and memorials to him were erected in the years following his death, and his name became synonymous with Southern resistance. Even though the Confederacy eventually lost the Civil War, Jackson's memory continued to inspire future generations, and his contributions to military strategy were studied by military leaders around the world. In the larger context of the war, Jackson's death was a significant turning point. It removed one of the most effective commanders from the Confederate Army at a crucial moment. However, his impact on the war, especially his contributions to the Confederate cause at Chancellorsville, could not be overstated. His actions during the battle, along with his death, ensured that his place in history would never be forgotten. The climax of Jackson's life, marked by his victory at Chancellorsville and his tragic death shortly afterward, left an indelible mark on the Civil War. It was a moment when his genius was fully realized, but it was also a moment that revealed the fragility of life and the unpredictability of war. Stonewall Jackson's legacy as one of the greatest military leaders of the Confederacy was secured, even as his death dealt a crippling blow to the South. The lessons learned from his tactics and leadership would live on for years, making him a lasting figure in the history of the American Civil War. Stonewall Jackson's death marked the beginning of a difficult period for the Confederacy. The Confederate Army, once led by one of its most talented generals, was now left with an irreplaceable loss. Jackson's death had a far-reaching impact, both on the battlefield and on the morale of the South. The immediate effects of Jackson's death were felt at the Battle of Gettysburg, which occurred just a few months after he passed away. General Robert E. Lee, now without Jackson's presence, was faced with a powerful Union army led by General George Meade. The battle, which took place from July 1 to July 3, 1863, ended in a significant defeat for the Confederacy. The loss at Gettysburg was one of the turning points in the Civil War, as it marked the first major defeat for General Lee in the Eastern Theater. Without Jackson's brilliant leadership, Lee found it more difficult to execute the same bold strategies that had brought him success in earlier battles. Jackson had been known for his ability to maneuver his forces quickly and take the enemy by surprise. Without him, the Confederate Army lacked that sharp, decisive edge. Following the loss at Gettysburg, the Confederacy entered a phase of decline. The Union Army, now gaining strength and momentum, began to press forward. The South, which had once been confident in its military prowess, now found itself facing numerous challenges. With the loss of key leaders like Jackson and other experienced commanders, the Confederate forces were struggling to keep up with the larger, better-equipped Union Army. As the war continued, the Confederate leadership became more and more fragmented. The absence of Jackson was felt not only on the battlefield but also in the political and strategic decisions that were being made. The South lacked the kind of unity that had helped them succeed earlier in the war. Confederate President Jefferson Davis found it increasingly difficult to coordinate with his generals and keep the morale of the Southern people high. The economic situation in the South also worsened. The war, now in its third year, had drained the Confederacy's resources. The South had relied heavily on agriculture, but as the Union Army continued to take control of Southern territories, it became harder for the Confederacy to maintain its supply lines. With fewer resources and fewer men to fight, the Confederate Army was losing its ability to sustain itself. By 1864, the situation for the Confederacy was looking increasingly bleak. General Lee, still commanding the Army of Northern Virginia, was now dealing with a Union Army that had become stronger and more organized. The Confederate Army's losses continued to mount, and the war seemed to be turning in favor of the North. The Union strategy of cutting off Confederate supply lines and wearing down the Southern forces through constant pressure was beginning to take effect. In addition to military defeats, the South faced increasing internal problems. The Confederate government struggled to maintain support from the Southern people. Many soldiers and civilians began to question whether the war was worth the cost. The loss of Stonewall Jackson had shaken the Confederate Army, but it was also a symbol of the South's fading hope. Jackson had been one of the brightest stars in the Confederate leadership, and his absence seemed to signal that the Confederacy was losing its fight. As the war dragged on, General Lee continued to lead his forces, but the Confederate Army was no longer the formidable force it had once been. The South had lost many of its key commanders, and the Union forces, under generals like Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman, continued to advance. Lee was eventually forced to surrender at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865, marking the official end of the Civil War. The Confederacy's decline after Jackson's death was a direct result of losing one of its best military leaders. Jackson had been an expert in battlefield tactics, and his ability to inspire his troops had been a driving force behind many Confederate victories. With him gone, the South struggled to find a commander who could match his skill and leadership. While Lee remained a respected general, the absence of Jackson left a void that could not be filled. The war had also taken a heavy toll on the Southern economy and infrastructure. The Union blockade had crippled the South's ability to trade, and much of the land had been devastated by the fighting. The war left Southern cities in ruins, and the economy was in shambles. The people of the South, who had supported the Confederate cause from the beginning, now found themselves faced with the harsh realities of defeat. In the years following the end of the war, the South entered a difficult period of reconstruction. The region had to rebuild both physically and politically. The Confederacy had failed to achieve its goal of independence, and the loss of its best military leaders like Jackson had contributed to that failure. The South was now part of the Union again, but it faced the challenges of rebuilding its economy and society. Jackson's death, while a personal tragedy, also marked the end of an era for the Confederate Army. The South's decline was not just a result of military defeats, but also the loss of leadership and the collapse of the Southern way of life. Jackson's legacy, however, lived on. He remained a hero in the South, admired for his courage, strategy, and unshakable faith in his cause. Even though the Confederacy lost the war, Jackson's influence continued to be felt long after his death. He had been one of the South's greatest military minds, and his role in the Civil War was crucial to the history of that time. Stonewall Jackson's legacy continues to be a significant part of American history, particularly in the context of the Civil War. While his contributions to the Confederate cause were overshadowed by the ultimate defeat of the South, his name remains remembered in the South and beyond for his military skills, leadership, and personal qualities. Jackson is often seen as one of the most skilled commanders of the Civil War. His ability to lead his troops with determination, and his remarkable battlefield tactics earned him admiration from both his own soldiers and his enemies. His most famous campaign, the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1862, highlighted his skill in maneuvering his forces and using the terrain to his advantage. Jackson's successful use of surprise and rapid movement had a lasting influence on military tactics, not only in the Civil War but also in military strategies in later years. His aggressive nature and ability to strike fear into the Union Army made him one of the most respected generals of the time. In the years following the Civil War, Jackson became a symbol of the Southern cause. His death was a tragic loss for the Confederacy, and it only increased his status as a martyr. In the South, he was often remembered as a symbol of courage, commitment, and self-sacrifice. Statues and memorials were erected in his honor, and his name became synonymous with the Southern spirit. For many Southerners, Jackson represented the ideal of duty to one's country and the willingness to fight for one's beliefs. However, Jackson's legacy is not without controversy. As a Confederate general, he fought to defend a system of slavery, and his actions are inevitably tied to that cause. The Confederate cause itself, which sought to preserve the institution of slavery, is now seen as one of the most divisive and harmful in American history. Many people today view Jackson's legacy through this lens, questioning the morality of his actions and the war he fought in. The legacy of Stonewall Jackson is still discussed in various ways, especially in the context of modern debates about the Confederate flag and the monuments dedicated to Confederate figures. For some, Jackson's memory is inseparable from the history of the South and the fight for independence. Others, however, feel that honoring a man who fought to uphold slavery and white supremacy sends the wrong message in today's society. The controversies surrounding his legacy continue to spark debates about how we should remember the Civil War and its leaders. Jackson's impact on military tactics is also important in understanding his lasting influence. His aggressive style of warfare, which emphasized speed, mobility, and surprise, changed the way wars were fought. Jackson's tactics were studied by future military leaders, and his methods were used in both the First World War and beyond. His emphasis on taking the initiative and maintaining pressure on the enemy has been cited as a reason for many of his victories, and these tactics remain relevant in modern military strategies. Jackson's personal life and character also contributed to his lasting impact. Known for his deep religious faith, Jackson was often referred to as the religious general. His belief in divine guidance during battle was something he held dear and was a source of strength for him. His faith influenced not only his soldiers but also his peers. Jackson's sense of duty and devotion to his men earned him respect from all who served under him. His commitment to the Southern cause, combined with his unwavering belief in his mission, made him a figure of admiration for many. In terms of cultural impact, Jackson has remained a prominent figure in Southern culture. In the years following the Civil War, Jackson became a part of Southern folklore. Stories about his bravery and commitment to the cause were passed down through generations. Even today, Stonewall Jackson is a central figure in many discussions about the Civil War, especially within the Southern United States. His image is often used in books, movies, and documentaries about the Civil War, portraying him as a hero of the Confederacy. Despite the controversies surrounding his legacy, Jackson's influence on American history cannot be ignored. His role in the Civil War, his impact on military strategy, and his status as a symbol of the Southern cause all contribute to his lasting legacy. In the decades following the war, His contributions were recognized by both the South and the rest of the country. Today, his place in American history remains secure, although the way he is remembered continues to evolve as society grapples with the complicated legacy of the Civil War. Jackson's legacy has also had an impact on the way the Confederate cause has been remembered. His image has been used to promote the idea of Southern pride, and his memory has often been associated with the idea of resisting Northern domination. For many in the South, Jackson is seen as a hero who fought for their way of life, regardless of the war's outcome. However, his association with the Confederacy and its defense of slavery has led to calls for the removal of monuments and statues dedicated to him. The debate over the place of Confederate monuments in modern America has only grown in recent years. In many Southern cities, statues of Jackson and other Confederate leaders have been taken down amid calls for racial justice and equality. For some, these monuments symbolize the pride of the South and its resistance during the Civil War. For others, they represent the oppression of African Americans and the legacy of slavery. This ongoing debate shows how Jackson's legacy is still relevant in modern times. Stonewall Jackson's story is one of complexity and lasting impact. Throughout his life, he made a significant mark on history, both through his military leadership and his place in the broader context of the American Civil War. His rise from humble beginnings to becoming one of the most respected Confederate generals speaks to his determination, skill, and strong sense of duty. Yet, his legacy is also tied to the difficult history of the Civil War and the defense of slavery, which continues to spark debates today. Jackson's military career is perhaps the most remembered aspect of his life. His tactics, his ability to lead, and his courage on the battlefield set him apart as one of the South's most brilliant commanders. His victories, especially during the Shenandoah Valley Campaign, demonstrated his remarkable understanding of military strategy. His troops admired him not only for his skills as a general, but also for his sense of honor and commitment to his soldiers. However, his legacy is not just about military strategy. Stonewall Jackson became a symbol of the Confederate cause, representing the South's fight against the Union. His death at the height of his military career was a tremendous loss for the Confederacy, and it only increased his status as a martyr. Today, many remember him as a hero, someone who embodied the spirit of the South. Yet, it's also important to recognize the darker side of the war he fought in, which was largely focused on maintaining the institution of slavery. Jackson's legacy has sparked ongoing discussions, especially in modern times, about how we view the leaders of the Confederacy. While he is still celebrated by many in the South, his role in defending slavery makes his memory controversial. The debate surrounding monuments, statues, and the public honoring of figures like Jackson is a reflection of this conflict. Should we remember him for his military genius and courage, or should his legacy be viewed through the lens of the Confederate cause he supported? His story also highlights the complexities of how we remember history. Figures like Jackson were products of their time, and the decisions they made cannot be understood without considering the context of the era in which they lived. At the same time, it is important to acknowledge the harm caused by the system they fought to protect. The ongoing conversations about Confederate monuments and the legacy of figures like Jackson are part of a larger struggle to come to terms with America's history of slavery, racism, and division. In the end, Stonewall Jackson remains an important figure in American history, but the way we view him is ever evolving. While he was undeniably a talented military leader who left a lasting impact on military tactics, the cause he fought for and his connection to the Confederacy will always be a point of contention. His story serves as a reminder that history is complicated, and the people who shaped it were not simply heroes or villains. They were human beings who lived within a specific time and context, and their actions continue to affect us today. Jackson's legacy, like that of many historical figures, invites us to reflect on the broader meaning of history and how we understand the past. As we remember figures like Stonewall Jackson, we must ask ourselves how we can learn from their lives and their mistakes. History should not be forgotten or erased, but rather understood in its full complexity.